Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners policy sessions on this June 19, 2023. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Commissioner Schrader is out of the office today. All the other commissioners are present. Your first policy session today is 23-hour Stabilization Center site and program development. Staff from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office and Health, Housing, and Human Services will present. Please come on up. Captain Malcolm McDonald and Mary Rumbaugh.
Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners, County Administrator Schmidt. My name is Mary Rumbaugh, and I am the Behavioral Health Division Director under Health, Housing, and Human Services, and I would like my colleague to introduce himself.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I am Captain Malcolm McDonald with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, and as you know, I oversee parole and probation and community corrections programs.
So we are here today to talk about our proposed partnership between Health, Housing, and Human Services and the Sheriff's Office to develop a 23-hour crisis stabilization center. Today we are seeking your approval to move forward with preliminary site development and the program design plan. This proposed project was part of the Shelter and Housing Projects Plan and Board Engagement Strategy approved by you all during the policy session on December 7th. We had quite a few different things in there. So this is really our more in-depth conversation today. So this morning we will be addressing the system need, the why we are asking for this, the proposed site and program model, appropriate related funding, and our next steps. So at a very high level, I'm going to just sort of start with defining what 23-hour crisis stabilization is, and we will also talk later about what it is not. So the 23-hour is pretty important. It's run as a 24/7 available resource, but the individual can only be there up to 23 hours. As soon as you move to 24 hours, the licensing of the program would have to change to be considered residential, and that's what we are not asking for. We're asking for 23. The center would provide a safe and supportive environment with compassionate care to address behavioral health needs in the moment and to provide medium and long-term supportive services beyond that initial crisis. The goal is to reduce the reliance on the jail and the emergency room and to connect individuals to both behavioral health and housing supports. The preliminary staffing model would be peers, so individuals with lived experience and in recovery from their own substance use and mental health concerns, a master level clinician, case managers for ongoing connection to services, and obviously an administrative oversight. The 23-hour stabilization center would actually be phase one of a two-phase program that we are interested in addressing a little later. The second phase would be around emergency respite housing, and we'll talk again a little bit more once we get to the physical location of the building. So we are going to talk initially about the origin of the idea. I'll turn it over to Malcolm, and then we will both address sort of the why, the need from law enforcement's perspective, as well as the behavioral health need and the gap that we would be filling by this proposal.
Thank you, Mary. The Sheriff's Office has identified that the increasing number of individuals in behavioral health crisis entering our jail, frequently interacting with law enforcement, is placing an overwhelming burden on our local criminal justice system. On average, just in our jail, the behavioral health crisis, someone in a behavioral health crisis tends to spend 900% more time in our jail than the average adult in custody, using vital beds that could be used for others that would be more, that should be in custody as opposed to someone in a behavioral health crisis. To address this issue, about 2 years ago, the Sheriff's Office took initiative to convene a sequential intercept mapping workshop. The SIM workshop brought together representatives of our local criminal justice system, behavioral health, medical, social services, to provide a comprehensive analysis of how individuals with mental health or substance abuse disorders entered and navigate through the criminal justice system locally. The process was key into identifying local strategies that could help divert people with mental health or substance abuse disorders away from our justice system towards appropriate treatment. As a result of the SIM workshop, a critical need was identified in Clackamas County to prioritize the diversion of individuals with mental health disorders from the criminal justice system into an around-the-clock accessible program that could successfully work with this population. A 23-hour crisis stabilization model has been identified as the most suitable approach to meet the needs of Clackamas County. Based on its successful implementation in other communities across Oregon, the model aims to provide a safe environment for individuals in crisis whose immediate needs cannot be managed in the community by offering assessment, crisis symptom reduction or relief, observation, and determination of level of care. The program helps to divert individuals from unnecessarily higher levels of care or detention in jail. Ultimately, the 23-hour stabilization model provides a critical support to individuals in crisis while reducing the burden on the healthcare and criminal justice system. I do want to highlight from a 2019 Clackamas County Frequent Users of Service Engagement, or FUSE analysis report, a couple key findings from 2019, that if we look at the top 1% of utilizers of emergency medical services, had significantly higher annual health care costs than the lower 99%, $10,600 versus $807. Just moving 100 individuals in the higher emergency department utilization category into the low utilization category could save the healthcare system $2.5 million per year. Similarly, by moving that 1% of individuals with high jail utilization into a lower utilization category, an estimated $1.7 million could be saved annually. Those are 2019 costs. I would imagine that we would save a greater amount if we could move that 1% down today. To highlight one other piece when we talk about need in the community, we have, from the Sheriff's Office to Oregon City PD, Westland PD, Lake Oswego PD, Milwaukee PD, Canby PD, and the contracted city of Wilsonville PD have all integrated behavioral health specialists into their departments to address individuals in crisis in the community where they're at the time, which has been very successful in connecting services amongst those communities and those professionals coming together to help address that problem. 23-hour stabilization is kind of that next natural step.
So to then partner on where the behavioral health need is, and Malcolm mentioned, Captain McDonald mentioned the sequential intercept mapping. So that was done 2 years ago, but actually we did a very first one over 10 years ago, and that is actually how we developed the Urgent Mental Health Walk-In Center that my division runs over on 82nd. It has been a very successful program. The community uses it a lot, but it was really developed with law enforcement in mind. And because it is not a 24/7 accessible program, it's just ran during 9 to 7. Law enforcement, they don't want to think about, is it open today? Is it not open today? It's now 7 o'clock. So they've really underutilized it. The community still utilizes it, so it needs to continue to be part of the continuum of care. But what we are missing is something that is really around, is accessible 24/7. So that is the need that we're trying to meet on the behavioral health side. In addition to the partnerships that Captain McDonald addressed with the police department, we also are statutorily required out of our division to run a 24/7 mobile crisis response. So if my staff are responding at 2 a.m., which they do, to a mental health issue in the community anywhere in this county, they don't have options other than the emergency room if somebody cannot be stabilized in the community or with their loved ones around them. So this center would actually be drop-off for both law enforcement as well as my mobile team. And from the work that, and we'll talk a little bit about program design, from the conversations we've been having, law enforcement and mobile teams are the highest utilizers of the successful 23-hour crisis stabilization centers that are out there. I would also like to note that we would then be the first in the Tri-County to lift up a 23-hour crisis stabilization center if we move forward on this. I'd like that we like that credit for sure. Yeah. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about the program site.
Yeah. I believe the board is familiar with our McBride property that we're in the process of doing a successful land partition with OLCC. So the location is the smaller of the buildings. We have 40 years of operating on that property. We have a great relationship with the city of Milwaukee. 25 of the last years, we've operated a substance abuse program. The population has been successful there. 40 years of working with our most challenging population at that location, it makes it ideal to continue. The population we're talking about in behavioral health crisis and the location itself, it's industrial. It is close proximity to the urban core. It's close proximity to hospitals. And again, like I say, we have a well-established relationship with the city of Milwaukee. It is, of course, the farthest away from our rural areas, but that's a challenge for any part of our system. And I think that when you look at a location, we wanted law enforcement to come here and not the jail and divert from the jail. For the majority of law enforcement, it is either closer than in the urban area or about the same distance. On average, I'll highlight that in other communities, it's about a 4 to 7 minute drop-off time for law enforcement. And so it's a very quick turnaround, which is much quicker than it is to book someone into jail. The physical structure itself, it's our building. The existing space is, currently it was designed with we have dorms and we have office space. It lends itself to become a 23-hour facility to split the two halves down the middle, convert the current office spaces into stabilization rooms. For a stabilization center, that is a reclining chair. It's a very basic setup, safe environment for an individual with low stimulation. The building is easy to retrofit is our initial assessment that we got from the architects. One of the important things in the existing system is that the dorm side of it, we'll talk a little bit about that side being emergency respite. So splitting the building, creating two programs out of one, and placing them in one building that exists, has an ideal location, and a safe location for the community too.
So in regards to the program design, as I mentioned earlier, we have been talking with a couple of programs across the state, in particular Hourglass Community Crisis Center, which is in Eugene. It is ran by Columbia Care. We've been really getting a lot of guidance from them about what the opportunities and challenges have been around their lifting up the program. And similar to our proposed design, it is heavily utilized by law enforcement and what is called their CAHOOTS program. So their mobile crisis response are the primary drop-off for their program. And it's been highly successful. They've actually provided us their staffing model. We'd want to staff it a little bit more enhanced than I think they have. The other program that the sheriff and her staff have toured is the Deschutes program. It is a little bit more comprehensive. It is ran by Deschutes Mental Health, but also is a 23-hour program. So lots to learn from from that county around what's worked well and where might we want to be aware of pitfalls. I think based on our review, we'd probably be modeling ours closer to Columbia Care. Again, it has a heavy peer and case management component, which is really what you're not doing actual treatment in 23 hours. What you really are trying to do is you need that master level clinician to make sure that we're not missing something around somebody's mental health condition, but really what the case manager and the peers are going to be doing are connecting longer term post that 23 hours to get that individual engaged or re-engaged in behavioral health services, as well as connected to the housing system, because we know that many of the individuals that will come to us are also houseless, and so that will be our connection point to then continue to get them connected to appropriate housing, short-term, long-term. So that's the model that we're looking at. I think what else is important to know about the 23-hour stabilization program, what it is and what it isn't. It is voluntary, so somebody cannot be required. They can decline, and if it's law enforcement who's engaging, law enforcement will have to make a decision about if that person is declining to come to us. What is the option? Obviously, somebody can agree to walk through our door, and they can agree, and they can choose to just walk out the door too. So we're hoping that won't happen. We're hoping that is 23-hour crisis stabilization center is going to feel better to that individual than going to going to jail. Going to jail or to the emergency room. As we know, the emergency room is not a terribly, as much as they try, it's not a very trauma-informed place for folks who are certainly in mental health distress. It can actually be more overwhelming to be in that environment. Really, the only excluding factor would be violence or a significant mental or a medical concern that we would not be able to address. There is not a medical component to these programs. Low-level intoxication would be okay, but again, if somebody needs a medical intervention because of their drug use, then we would need to have them go somewhere else, and we would be able to serve up to 8 individuals at any given time. I think Hourglass tends to see anywhere from 4 to 6 individuals, and their average amount of time that somebody is there is actually 12 to 16 hours. It's very rare that somebody actually has to go all the way up to the 23-hour mark. I was pretty surprised by that data. Yeah, that was interesting for sure. So we really, again, as we have done our research, we really feel like that model is probably going to be the best for the building space. So we're going to turn it over to funding, one time and ongoing.
So, from the Sheriff's Office perspective, we submitted an ARPA request for the building for improvements. Our key is to utilize the building for solutions for the community that will reduce the impact to individuals who are entering the jail that are in this behavioral health crises or interacting with law enforcement. We want to find a way to reduce that population in our jail. And this was a key way and a location like I identified to do that. So the ARPA request is really to make that building suitable for a program, to make the improvements that need to happen to it and get us to the next step. I think this program is very doable. I'm excited again to talk about this program. I have toured Hourglass. I have toured the Deschutes County program and see the success they've had. I think we can get there. So the ARPA request is really to make the building to be the best it can be and get us to that next step, and we'll talk a little bit more about those next steps.
And Chair Smith, I know you're gonna specifically ask about SHS, so at that point I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask Vahid Brown if I can. Okay.
Thank you very much. I know the board is just chomping at the bit to
Okay.
ask you some questions, and the materials you have submitted are excellent. Your presentation is excellent today. I have some very specific questions, too, on going forward. I mean, I think we love this. We love this idea. I know I do. I can't speak really on behalf of the board, but I think we're happy to have a program like this come forward. I do have some questions about the future success. For instance, the land partition with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission that I assume is in progress. Can you give us an update on that?
So I don't have the most recent from Mr. Munns, but it continues to move forward we have the agreement drafted, and he continues to work with DOJ. I have worked directly with the new director of OLCC to ensure that he is able to move it through, and there's no additional obstacles. Everything is moving as we want it to. So there has been no changes to the progress we're making. We still have site work that has to be done.
Survey?
Survey, thank you. I could
Yes.
not. So the survey work still needs to take place, but we have that agreement, the revisionary clause, and thanks to your.
Revisionary clause, if the use doesn't continue, it reverts back to the
Correct.
state of Oregon.
So yes, correct. As long as we continue to do community corrections, substance abuse, mental health, social services, there's a wide variety of things that benefit the community that we will continue to do on that site. It
Okay.
is moving forward like I expect it to, and we'll have it successfully take over that
Well, I
piece
like
of
that we
land.
have a phase one and a phase two, and I want to cut to the ARPA funding. Why did you identify ARPA as a way to fund this?
I think that was a conversation between Mary, I, and Solutions with Public and Government Affairs as a way to get here, to get the building where we needed to be so we could have a provider come to us and work with us and pilot this program.
Okay, and how did you get to $1 million? Do you have bids for construction?
For the roof and parking lot, we have bids from facilities. The actual cost to do the renovations, we're in the architectural and design, working with a architectural firm to look at it and give us some concepts. Our provider that we've been working with came in, looked at our facility, gave us some conceptual ideas of what would work best, and gave us a range of potential options if we could meet those in making some design changes. So there's line of sight improvement for a facility, some changes to the types of where the bathrooms are, so the staff, and then bathrooms and showers for individuals entering the program. So we have a range. Like I said, initially, the building lends itself well to doing renovations at the lowest cost possible. So the actual full cost.
So you kind of have, I'm going to cut you off, Malcolm.
Okay.
Okay, you know what, you want money, I want to know what it's going to cost. What if you have to come back, like many of the construction projects in this county, oh, I need more money, and we've already spent all our ARPA dollars, and there's no other dollars available. So you do not have an exact cost of what these improvements are going to be. You have a partial cost.
Correct.
Okay, now, the next question is this. Mary, do we have to use ARPA dollars for this?
No, I mean, ARPA could be one revenue stream, and then I think the conversation, and it's both the one-time sort of that capital
Yes.
improvement
Yes.
that I think we need to discuss today, and then I also want to make sure you're aware of the ongoing, which is actually long-term sustainable funding.
I do that, and we do have a nonprofit, but do we have to pay the nonprofit to do this work? Hourglass?
Columbia Care is who
Or
we've been in
Columbia Care.
conversation with. Our dollars will stretch much farther if we contract with a community-based organization
Okay, so
to
we're
provide
going to
the
contract with the
staffing.
CBO to do this, right, which is fantastic. Love that, too. I really want to get down to brass tacks and sharpen that tack, because my opinion is, if we don't have to use ARPA dollars for this, ARPA dollars can be reserved for the housing needs and care needs that SHS does not qualify for. So I want to ask the question of anybody in the room, Vahid, you can come up. Is there another way that we can get this done without using ARPA dollars, is my question, for the $1 million initial investment? Or can we do half or something?
Do you want to switch? Well, as long as, yeah, perfect.
Good morning, Vahid Brown, Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development. Chair, the question regarding SHS specifically, so I'm not answering your whole question. Your question is, are there other sources of funds that
Yes,
can be
other
used to do
sources.
that? I think there are. I think that H3S could identify other sources of funds that would be able to potentially address some of the needs related to the improvement of the building. SHS is tricky at that stage. Since we don't have a kind of a commitment or a contract for a program that would include housing services, then it may not be an eligible use until there is that commitment in place. But-
Until, excuse me, can I interrupt, until phase 2 happens?
That's right. Well,
Okay.
I mean, even in if we mean by phase 2, like the initiation of programming,
Well, phase 2 would have been the emergency respite housing.
yes, but even in phase 1 of operating the 23-hour stabilization center, we could fund some housing-specific staffing at this facility that could connect people there into housing or shelter or what have you. So we could fund operations with SHS at any phase. The question about before there's any operations, there's no contract with the CBO, we have a county asset that needs some improvements, it needs a new roof or whatever. SHS at that stage is probably not an appropriate use because it's what if we don't have anything in kind of on paper that says this building will be used for an eligible purpose, right?
Okay, are there any, okay, so we've exhausted that. Is there anything else, any other funding sources in H3S that could do the $1 million remodel?
So about 2 years after every biennium, the state does settle my community mental health program contract, and any dollars that are not taken back and that remain with me, they are restricted dollars. I have to reinvest those into the behavioral health system. I could use some restricted funds to go ahead and cover the $1 million.
Okay. I'm just kind of going down that road. And if we take these funds, the restricted funds that then became unrestricted, are we depriving any other service by taking those SHS dollars and putting them in the stabilization center?
Can you restate the question?
Okay. So you said you had unrestricted funds at the end of the biennium, possibly.
Correct.
Okay, that were targeted for here, but they're not used, so they come back to you. Okay, I understand that. Those are not targeted, those, so we are not taking away a service from any other population if we put it in the stabilization center.
Correct. The only requirement is that they are reinvested at our discretion within the behavioral health system. So
Do
yes,
you think you will have those funds available?
yes.
Okay. Do you think it's enough?
Yes, I will have more than the 1 million or so that we would need.
Okay. I'm going to recommend to this board that if it's possible, that we use that funding source. They won't be available to the end of the fiscal year, but Malcolm, it will give you time to make sure on the bids that we don't go over the 1 million for what you need. And, you know, I'm just really gun shy. We have had so many projects in this county that we thought, oh, yeah, we got it covered, we got it covered. We get the actual contractors in there, and they start penciling out every single little door, window, chair, carpet, and it just goes crazy. So that's why I'm being really picky here today, because I want this to be successful. I want us to do this really bad.
I'd like to add, we are partnering with facilities, so much of the work will be done by our own county employees and facilities. That is a partnership that's part of that and working with us through this process. Could I add one? We have the sheriff and undersheriff and have met with the city of Milwaukee and had a wonderful conversation with the mayor, the city manager, and the police chief. They're very excited about this program, so they are supportive. We are in their city. And, you know,
Malcolm, I appreciate that, I know they are, but the mayor and the chief of police aren't the builders, and they're not paying the bills.
I just wanted to make sure I
Okay.
got that on I understand.
All right.
And I wanted to make sure I had that on the record that they are favorable, so you were aware of
Usually,
that.
everybody is favorable if somebody else pays for the program. You do know that.
Oh, I'm very
All
well
right.
aware,
All
yes.
right. We have, all commissioners want to talk. Commissioner Savas, take your time.
Yeah, but they also get to change their minds too, so things happen, right? I mean, sometimes the city will support it, then sometimes they won't support it. So I'm confident that they'll support it. I too am excited, and so don't get me wrong if I ask some hard questions here. So my intention is just as genuine as it appears everyone else's is to see this happen. So applaud your efforts and work. My understanding that what I've learned here in the last 30 days, for example, is that we maybe not have exhausted SHS dollars for some facilities related to shelters. So let's pursue that and get a 100%. We can. What conditions can we? Because I had a conversation with Adam Brown about some scenarios in which, you know, some sticks and bricks, dollars for sticks and bricks can be applied under SHS. So I want to make sure we fully exhaust that. So again, hard question, but as I read the packet and you get into your phasing 1 and 2, Malcolm, you mentioned that the concept is to divide the building in half. The front part is 23-hour, the back part would be shelter, respite, right? But the way it's worded here, it says it may also allow for a small emergency shelter, which is the respite piece. I think before we make an investment in the building, I mean, I think that should be, it can, and I'm not saying it's a matter of semantics today, but it seems to me, I want to make sure it's thought out well.
And we do too. That's the architectural and design coming in and working with us in a process to initially look at what can be done in with the concepts we've given them. Can we divide the building? Can we ensure that the needs of our CBO are there and the needs of respite can happen, so we have the appropriate exit, entry, all those things. They have that information, and we want to spend as little money up front until we know what we can do and be successful. Bottom line, I'm fairly confident we can get the 23-hour program and it will work. I've been in Lane counties. That is the base model of a program. Like we talked about Deschutes. Deschutes is the platinum version. So we don't want to spend money unless we have to. We want to make sure we do this in steps that is going to benefit the citizens of Clackamas County and be fiscally responsible.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is I don't want to, and maybe we're saying the same thing, just want to make sure I'll use different words here. I want to make sure that if we hit the go button on the 23-hour piece, we know when we're ready to do that, we know that the housing piece and the building will accommodate all of that together, right?
Exactly.
So I want to make sure we're solid there. So getting back to Mary, you mentioned capacity of 6 to 8, right? 8, I believe.
In the current model design without major reconfiguration, we believe we can serve up to 8 individuals at a time.
So would the respite piece also be an equal amount?
The respite has a higher capacity.
Okay.
We have to work with
So it'll be longer stays?
Yeah, I mean, we have dorms, so those dorms and the number of each dorm could hold, we really have to work with the provider of what would be safe in an environment that works with that population. It's not the same as the programs that I run today, and we've run out of that program. It would be a different environment. But yes, so there's a higher capacity when we look at the respite.
What do you estimate that capacity at?
I don't have an estimated, I mean, the building historically was 34 individuals. It would be less than 34 for that type of environment on the initial information we got from someone that works in that space. To be safe, when you're talking about a respite facility, you could not put 34 people in there who are in this emergency respite state. I don't have an accurate number. I just can tell you it's less than 34, and whether it's just, you potentially could cut that number in half, and that might be the closest thing to a guess.
Okay. So I don't have great experience with this, but I do have some in that knowing that people that are suffering from behavioral health challenges need their support system around them, right? And if some of them are homeless, that support system looks quite different than those who have a home or have a family and a support system around them. So when people are actually released from the facility, let's say it's one or both of the halves of the building, do we help them get back to their support system?
That is going to be critical. And it's not just letting them out the front door and walk about their way. There has to be a way to connect them back to the community they came from.
No, go ahead, Paul.
Okay. So the reason I say that is because the jail is quite different, right?
Correct.
And I think Oregon City is experiencing when they open the door and they say you're free. They don't have any means of getting back to their support system. If they're homeless, they certainly essentially find a new place to move in, which is they're being displaced maybe from, the edge of the county, the north part of the county to Oregon City. And so Oregon City's population has grown significantly as a result of where the jail is located.
I'd like to respond. We have the transition center, its initial development and its redevelopment after the pandemic is there to ensure that doesn't happen to the best of our ability in providing the services they need. My experience and we're well experienced in ensuring and how to get people back to where they need to be in the community. Obviously, some have to do that voluntarily. Some, if they're under community supervision, there's some other ways to go about that. But we're very good at finding resources for individual and even those that are not always, that are resistive. So I think that we put things in place, and this program even more importantly, that someone that has just been in a behavioral health crisis and now is in a better state, we want to connect them to the most appropriate. Some may return to houselessness or homelessness. That may just be, and we talked to other programs, but we return them to the community where they were from or a better environment. Wherever we're going to try to do something that is an improvement on what their situation was. And we're not just going to return them to out the door into the community, which is the city of Milwaukee. That's a concern they had, and we are working on addressing that.
Okay.
And
So
and
my-
if I could just add, I'm sorry, Commissioner, that's the role of really the peers, because they know firsthand how important that natural support system is. So their role, that's why I want to staff it more heavily with a peer model, because they'll be able to really walk alongside that person post-discharge to make sure they are connected in a way that sometimes the traditional sort of treatment, you do your best, but you can only take that person so far. But the peers will have more flexibility to get that person reconnected to their support system.
My last question, more for Vahid. So ideally, if we take them back to their support system, it's not a houseless support system, right? What, do we have the capacity, is there a plan to take them to the next step, which is transitional housing or permanent housing?
Yeah, that's right, Commissioner. That would be the plan. If we had a team of housing navigators located there, 23 hours isn't enough time to get someone ready for a move into an apartment. But once enrolled in navigation services in our current programming models, if there's not room at the inn, so to speak, well, literally at the Econo Lodge or our transitional housing program, our navigation providers are funded to provide vouchers individually to households who are working with navigation if that's needed. So someone could go from the navigation center with a navigator to either a transitional housing placement, either at a facility like the Econo Lodge or scattered site, and work directly with that person on their navigation plan. And hopefully with the goal of ending up in permanent housing. It might take 30 days, it might take 60 days, but they would be connected to the system.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Yeah, you can always come back. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yeah, I too have some concerns about the cost of the stabilization center and also costs for operating it. Question, when you drop somebody off at the 23-hour stabilization center, does the Clackamas County Sheriff have any authority over what happens to that person after that point? And is there any requirement for the sheriff to provide security for the respite housing?
No, our involvement is the building and getting this off the ground.
Okay.
So there is a partnership with the CBO, and when we look at other communities that operate this, that if they need assistance, because the likelihood in this population, we drop them off, they may not be as stable as thought. Law enforcement may need to respond and assist them. The goal is to divert them from law enforcement, but ultimately, we want a community provider to operate in this space. They have the expertise. Individuals could enter and also need to go to the hospital after their assessment. So sometimes it is just a initial assessment, and other things need to happen with that individual. It may not be the most appropriate at the time. But law enforcement is going to evaluate the individual when they come in contact with them and what is best at that moment. Is that individual, they have choices. Those choices, stabilization centers is a much better option for most people than jail. So there's a voluntary piece to it. Yes, once we drop them off and they enter it, law enforcement from in the county, not just sheriff's office, any law enforcement agency, they're done for the moment, unless the provider needs assistance and is going to request law enforcement return.
And for the emergency respite housing, how long of a duration would somebody stay there?
I think our
It will sort of depend on how it's licensed. If it's licensed under the state, somebody cannot stay there longer than 30 days. So we'd have
Okay,
up to
yeah.
30 days.
So that facility would need to provide subsistence, nursing staff? You'd have to have somebody monitoring their condition during that time?
The individual the individual would be receiving the behavioral health support. So somebody who has more complex medical would not be appropriate for this type of respite.
I see.
Yeah, I think our concept is someone that has stabilized and respite would be most appropriate for them, and they're willing to. We've addressed the immediate crisis, and this is an opportunity to give us some more time to work with them, that respite side. So it's kind of that next step. Not everyone's going to be appropriate for it.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Schul, can I address the operating funding? So because it's important for us to give acknowledgement to this. So when CCSO and H3S began this conversation, we also engaged in a conversation with Care Oregon, which is one of our coordinated care organizations. And they have community development dollars, and they have been investing in all 3 counties around the behavioral health development system. They are committed $1.5 million annually ongoing to operating costs. So that money is committed, and that money is as long as Care Oregon doesn't go out of business, which they won't, that is how we will be operating. And we already know that we need about 1.1 annually to operate it. That gives us some flexibility to do some enhanced staffing. So the front end question is still an important one, Chair, but the operating ongoing, we have a complete commitment, plus then SHS for some of the housing navigation. That's just for the 23-hour stabilization.
Not the
We have to address respite differently.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner West.
I'm really excited by this. Captain McDonald, are we supposed to say, use titles, right? Captain, hi, Malcolm.
I'm good with that, sir.
So this is where we sat down a few weeks ago with some of the young men that have gone through the more residential treatment nearby, right?
Correct.
And it was kind of in its ready to be retrofitted phase, as it is probably right now, the building.
Correct.
Yeah. Just for the record, I'm so impressed by what you guys have done with the residential piece, and so inspired by what you guys are looking to do here. I think it fills a gap in the care continuum that's necessary. I think it's innovative. I think it's fiscally responsible. I think it checks a lot of boxes. Am I right? We're dealing with a lower barrier population at this point to give them that essential emergency support that they need, and those people deserve to have that care. I fundamentally believe they deserve that care. And I think it helps get Clackamas County on a pathway to better recovery. And to me, it mirrors recovery model systems that you hear us talk about. Couple questions I have is, how do we know, since it's kind of new, and we are planning and assessing and reassessing and planning it as we go through this process, what do our measurable outcomes look like for success for our goals as we do this? I mean, it's a little bit of a smaller population, 8 for stabilization, not sure on the respite care piece, both essential, but I'm kind of curious what you guys are looking at to know that these are our measurable outcomes and we know we're hitting these benchmarks.
So in regards to connection to behavioral health, we already do this through our urgent mental health walk-in center. So anyone who has a touch point with us, we actually are following up with them 30 days post to see if they actually made their appointment, engaged in their appointment. So I think it will be some of those outcome measures that will become pretty critical. And then recidivism. If all of a sudden now they're back again, what has happened. So we'll be monitoring sort of recidivism, but we already have a model for how to make sure that folks are connected. So we can make an appointment, but if they don't make that appointment, that's a fail for us and our system. So some of those really concrete, measurable opportunities will be there, Commissioner.
Okay. I appreciate that. And it sounds a little bit innovative in Oregon, and I'll wrap a couple questions into one. I want to know, how is it evidence-based and how is that evidence informing the work? And it sounds like we have some similar models in Deschutes and Lane. But you also alluded to where Clackamas County would be uniquely special in how we do it. You alluded to like that, make sure Clackamas County gets its credit. Can you explain to me a little bit about like the evidence that we're using to inform this intervention and this action we're taking? And then how are we different again than those other counties?
So some of the evidence is coming through a federal program called Crisis Now, which is really what Oregon has adopted around 24/7 mobile crisis response. And if there was an open checkbook, that open checkbook would include, after that mobile response, if that individual can't be stabilized in the community, they would then be referred to a 23-hour crisis stabilization program. And Columbia Care's program probably runs the closest to what your staffing model model would look like around peers, case manager, and master level clinicians. So it is a model the state of Oregon is actually looking at. They just don't have the money at this point to lift up those programs as they had hoped as they expanded mobile crisis through this Crisis Now model. It's a program Senator Wyden has been a huge proponent, and it's really it's sort of where the cahoots language sort of comes in at times. So that's where that really exists. I think where we're unique, where we would be unique is our leveraging of the role of peers. Peers become so critical, and I think we are unique in this county that we actually have more peer-delivered services than any other county. And I know this because I'm meeting with my colleagues across the state, and so that would be the piece that would be different, and I think actually get us better outcomes. Again, those programs are getting great outcomes, but we would be getting even better outcomes because of the staffing of the peer model.
I totally agree with you, and Captain, this is for you. Is there a possibility that the individuals, the people that are involved in this more lower barrier stabilization center would be then a good fit to go into your residential program because it's so successful, it's so good?
So our residential program or community correction space, the individuals would have to be on community supervision with us. And I can tell you some of the population that would utilize this that I'm responsible for, that are on parole and probation, some of them, yes, could enter that program, but many of those, their behavioral health crises or their acuity and behavioral health is so high that they wouldn't be, but it would divert them from jail and give them a safe space. I mean, I have not, the population that we're talking about, this 1% has changed and grown so much in the last 3 years. I mean, this is my 26th year, and the majority of it have been on Main Street. And just as an example, I have not, every day I'm just, I don't have a word for it, but what I see in the people suffering that are, it's not about housing. They're not housable because of their behavioral health crisis. They need another option. My staff do an amazing job with those that are on supervision, to the extent that some that need stabilization, we have a conference room. We had an individual, he just needed stabilized. We put him there, a place for him to lie down. We have to be creative. We need an option, and other than jail, law enforcement needs an option other than jail, and we have to provide some relief for our jail, because it is just, it's a horrible place for someone in crisis to be too, and we know that. CSAP, it's a great resource, but we're dealing with a lot of challenges with an individual. In the behavioral health, what we're really good at, because almost everyone has a mental health condition once they enter our program, but it's that acuity, the severity of it, and some may be appropriate. But this is the first step, as you said, the continuum. This is kind of that entryway, and then we have to build upon it. But this is a key to having the first step as we add to our local continuum.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that most people that struggle with either addiction, mental health, and sometimes houselessness or homelessness, I push back against the narrative that those people just want to exist there. I think that there's so much hopelessness that they just don't know how to not exist there, but they don't want to. People don't want to. And I like how this is, the way that this is self-directed in a way that it is self-directed, but it's almost like you have a choice, right? Am I correct? You either get to go into this choice, which maybe isn't as, nobody wants to go to jail, or you're also being a chance to make this choice over here where we're going to stabilize you and help you get, on a different pathway. So there's a little bit of accountability naturally built into the system, right, the way that this is. Vahid, you talked to me a little bit about how to do the carrot and the stick, but not the stick so hard they fall off the pedestal and can't get back on, right? We had that, remember that conversation with you? I think this does that. And my last question is as we look kind of visionary and forward, bigger picture, like going higher with it. Do you see this being sufficient enough to meet the need with this small of 8 people and a small amount of residential, or do you guys see this being a successful model? We may have to look at expanding it, and I guess that also ties in. I keep seeing CPAP tied to this just naturally because of how I saw it, but like where next? What's next?
I mean, I would just say 8 people at a time is actually really significant. We can
Yeah,
make
that's significant, okay.
and because you will be moving through those beds or the chairs pretty quickly.
Okay.
We'll be able to impact way more, over time. So absolutely, if it's hugely successful and we can find additional dollars and we can find expansion opportunities, I absolutely think, and again, this is the model that really the state was looking at for once we make a touch point with mobile crisis or law enforcement, again, not having people go to the jail or the hospital, which are so expensive and not trauma-informed. So I do believe that there is a lot of support, especially even at the state level, to look at if they can find the money for ongoing expansion across the state.
Thank you. That's the last of my questions, and I'm really excited about this opportunity. And yeah, this is really great. Thank you.
So, Commissioners, we can't get so far out over our skis that we don't realize what's in front of us to accomplish first. We need to get this accomplished first. I have one quick question. Captain McDonald, when you pick up people, do they get a choice of either going to the jail or going to the 23-hour stabilization center?
If we have a stabilization center, there would be options.
Okay, now my question is this. If they refuse, do they go to jail?
That is the likely outcome.
Okay, that's what I want to know. I would rather pick the stabilization center any day of the week. Gary, we brought up a lot of funding ideas here. What do you recommend, and how do you think we should proceed on this, since another funding idea has come forward?
I think that the staff option in the staff report is still appropriate. Option 1, which would be approving staff to go forward with site development and program planning. It does not commit the funding streams, but rather they'll come back to you with, because it appears ARPA, you need to find other options besides ARPA. But you're not
Yes.
committing to ARPA today.
Right, and then we'll come back, and once that's stabilized, we can hear from you again, and then maybe, Malcolm, you'll have time to get the bids in on what it's going to cost, because I'm very picky about that. Very picky about that.
Yes, no, we understand that, and I am the same way. I want to know the cost, and we want to hold people to that. So to move this forward successfully and renovate the building to the best to support the community provider, but also being mindful of taxpayers' money.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a lot of entities coming together to make this successful, and we certainly want that to happen as well. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure if I need to modify the motion, because I'm ready to move on the motion of option 1, but in my earlier questioning, the responses I got was that the building would be, we wouldn't hit the go button until we knew we could do both the respite and, so do I need, the motion I'm considering making here is approve continued site development and program planning for the 23-hour stabilization contingent upon the compatibility with the respite option of that. So again, I don't want to mess anything up, but I don't want to put a lot of investment in the building and find out we can't do the other piece of it, right? Because that would be, the rest of the building would be lost, so to speak.
So to speak, I suppose, I think we have funding for 1.5 million ongoing, so the investment to the county to at least have a stabilization program would be very important, and the other half of the building may remain vacant until we can find an acceptable program that could go there, or the funding. So I think we would come back to the board with an option for only one program or the option for both and what those costs would be. I think we want to be able to explore both options because our goal is to utilize, develop the respite type housing piece. So we want to come back, but if there's an obstacle to that, we'd want to come back and have that discussion. But I do not want to lose the option because this 23-hour stabilization is critical for our community, critical for the population we want to serve, and to relieve the criminal justice system. Every time we divert someone from jail, we save the system as a whole.
Thank you very much. Gary?
You could say on the option in the staff report, approve continued site development and program planning for the 23-hour crisis stabilization center, and then add contingent upon staff presenting final funding plans to the board, which would encompass the whole program site and the funding.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. I'm going to try to restate this motion. Approve continued site development program planning for the 23-hour stabilization center, subject to staff.
Contingent upon staff presenting a final funding plan to the board.
Okay. And whenever you get, that motion has been made by Commissioner Savas and seconded by Commissioner West. Open for discussion. So when you get your plans ready, please let staff know so we can get it scheduled for a policy session, because I want to see it go. I don't want to sit around and wait, oh yeah, we had that presentation 2 months ago, now where is it? That happens a lot in this county, and I'm kind of getting impatient. This board is getting impatient, and I'm saying this to everybody out there. Let's get the money out the door, let's get some progress on this issue going forward. Commissioner West.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we move with great urgency on this. It's needed like yesterday. My question's quick. Along the fun, you might be able to answer it very fast, yes or no, Commissioner West, on this. So it may be a simple question, but is opioid funding a possibility for this?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll hear
Mr.
back.
West, we have a funding source. We're going to go with this for
Well,
now.
I think it was a valid question, so I'm just curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it might be, Commissioner, we have to check, but it's possible, yes.
Cool.
And we also like our spending those opioid dollars. There's very few of those opioid dollars compared to what's available here.
It could just be on the list of options, possibilities. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Shannon, please take the poll.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Go forth and be prosperous.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Okay. Gary?
Next policy session, short-term rental registration program proposal, continued. Commissioners Savas and Shull will present.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to open up my packet here.
Yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready to go. Do we need staff to come up?
It wouldn't hurt to have them up here ready to,
Caroline Hill and
Respond.
Everett Wild, please grace us with your presence. And we're opening our packets, so let's everybody get our materials ready, including me.
yeah, so what I will say is that probably the most, I call it significant, it's not that significant, but change, and what we heard was concern about the lottery dollars being used. So staff went back to the drawing board and came back with a model, which is listed at the very end. So there's two tables, two funding tables, one with red, which is the option one, and the other one, which is option two, which utilizes, does not utilize lottery dollars, but instead utilizes a different approach to the surcharge, and that difference being, instead of a surcharge to the TLT tax, it's a surcharge to the actual daily room rental amount. It averages out, actually, to put it into context, especially for those who are watching and listening, it averages out at less than $1 a day. It's in the cents. Is that correct, Everett? Caroline?
So the proposal would be for a 0.85% surcharge on the rental rate. So if your rental's $100 a night, it's 85 cents.
Yeah.
If your rental's $200 a night, it's $1.70.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially, it's a very, very low impact in dollars and cents. So we're not using the lottery dollars. There seemed to be a little bit of concern about that. So staff did a great job with that. And I think that's the biggest issue that jumps out to me. We did meet with the TDC. They seem to be, I think we allayed a number of their concerns, so they seem to be supportive. Our ask from them is, our modest ask is 120. Our big ask was 200. I think if they fall in there somewhere, again, the last table shows that this will be sustainable for several years, even though, again, a reminder, this is a 3-year pilot. And all the other concerns about caps and so forth, we cross that out. You can see in there, it's called crossed out in red, that we'll tackle that in 3 years. And so no one really got everything everyone wanted in this, but for a pilot, I think it's pretty reasonable and pretty thoughtful. And Commissioner Shull, anything you want to speak to in particular?
Yes, this draft, like Commissioner Savas said, is a compromise. We had people on both sides of the aisle. Some wanted a very restrictive regulation. Others wanted a very liberal or no regulation. One of the concerns I've heard many, many times is about the number of STRs and their impact on long-term rental availability in the areas where these STRs are, and also the impact on the sale of residential properties. When a property is in a desirable location for STR, we see the sale price increase because of the attractiveness and the profitability of STRs. So if I had my druthers, I would add to this a more restrictive language regarding the permitting of STRs to require that STRs have a owner-occupier, which is what we see in many counties across the state and along the West Coast. That would be to reduce the inclination for commercial entities to come in and buy up a lot of STRs, thereby drastically reducing the availability of long-term rentals or the affordability of homes that come on the market, affordability to the local residents who might want to buy a property. So we've talked about that. The inclination of the board at this time, I believe, if we would have added some of that more restrictive language on permitting, we would have reduced our chances to get this approved and out to public hearing. So for the people listening who wanted a more restrictive regulation, that's kind of the background of where we are and why it reads the way it does. And like Mr. Wiles said, this is a pilot program, and at the end of 3 years, we will have a record of information on how this goes, and then we can look at this issue about restrictive permitting at that time. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have some thoughts and questions that haven't been answered. Even though the more restrictive language is taken out in this pilot program, it sounds like at least one commissioner, and maybe another commissioner that isn't even on the board yet, could come in and make this permanent, which is in direct conflict to private property owners' rights. And Commissioner Scholl made the statement that if it's owner-occupied, it keeps big commercial entities from coming in and buying up properties. That's not true. Any commercial entity can come in and buy anybody's property, regardless of the use, regardless of the ownership. So I don't see how making that statement keeps us from going there. Again, we are adding one FTE at a time, commissioners, when we are cutting back positions countywide because of austerity measures that we are taking. So here we got this department adding an FTE. I don't support that, okay? And then my third objection is, do we have Commissioner Savas in writing from the Tourism Development Council that they are willing to supplement this at the cost that you say of $125,000 a year?
We certainly won't go forward without that, Chair. So
I can't go forward with that today when there are too many obstacles in the way. For me, the first obstacle is one FTE when we really don't know what the source of the funding is. From what I've heard from the Tourism Council, they don't want to do that. And I don't know what the conversations were. I was not privy to the conversations. If we had a Tourism Council person come before us and say, or the chair, or Samara Phelps can say, this is a goal for us, I would feel more comfortable. We just had a previous policy session where we said, you need to nail down the numbers. You need to nail down the numbers. But yet, in this policy session, we're kind of hoping that it comes through and you want this passed, I'm kind of, I'm not there yet on this because there's too many uncertainties with this. And we have two more commissioners in the queue, Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner Shaw.
Yeah, just to respond fully, and that is that, we get grant monies, regardless what department it is, we get grant monies, SHS dollars. We're constantly hiring people to utilize those funding. The board made it perfectly clear, and I agree, that this program would self-sustain itself and stand on its own for a three-year period. So, and this FTE that's being hired is solely being funded on these revenues that are displayed in the two tables. So I can say with confidence, we met the board's requirement fully in that regard. And I stand very confident, not only does this go 3 years, but this goes several years out, being financially stable on the last table. So it's yes, yes, and yes on that aspect. The regulation, you're correct. Sure, a board can come along and change anything, a number of things we don't like, in years to come. We can't help that. It could be, but I think if we have a model here that works and this 3-year pilot proves itself, most specifically demonstrates to the TDC that it can not only self-sustain, but it can actually deliver revenue back, therefore it. So I heard more positive things from the TDC Council when I met with them virtually here about a week or so ago, and I think Commissioner Scholl was there as well. So again, we go a hearing or we go so far out there and they say no, they already know. They heard from us directly that it's dead on arrival if there's no funding from them, at least at the minimum 120. This model works at the minimum level. Certainly we can do more. There will be some initial cost, and the better we can ramp up and tool up for the initial startup cost, that if they augment that at 150 or 200, we can get our work done quicker, more expediently, more efficiently, and effectively. So everyone will be more happy, and they'll get a return on their investment. That's the language and the conversations I had with the TDC. So I share your concern with an FTE. Again, this is being funded primarily with outside dollars, outside this region dollars, so it's not Clackamas County dollars, it's tourism dollars it's being funded with, essentially.
Okay.
So I think
Thank
it
you.
answers all those questions.
Thank you. You made an analogy that is not correct. The analogy was that SHS dollars, well, we have control over that department. This board decides how those because they're under our governance model. However, the Tourism Council is an independently elected or independently appointed, and it's a different, is that right, Gary? It's a different type of animal we're dealing with. We do not control them. We do not tell them how to spend their dollars and what to do, and that's my issue. Am I right on that?
Yes, by state statute and county code, it's a partnership. You both have to agree, so they could overrule you and you could overrule them, but you both entities have to agree.
So we just can't say, tourism folks, we want 100 or 200, and it would be nice because we'd have lots of programs, okay? But I still don't see where the language is not definitive that they're going to give us that money, and I can't go forward on that today unless I have a letter signed by David Pendleton or Samara Phelps saying that, yes, we agree to do that. That's just, hey, it's how I operate it. Commissioner Savas, I appreciate your work on this. I appreciate the problem we're trying to solve. But in doing so, we might have a program that goes flat if the slight chance is we don't have funding. And that's why the earlier folks that came up, Captain McDonald's was very earnest in saying, but he didn't have the total cost of what it would cost to remodel. How did you get to $1 million? Did you just grab $1 million out of the air? And whenever I hear a program that says $1 million, it's probably closer to maybe 890,000. Then why do you need $1 million? So I'm so skeptical going forward on all this money that's being thrown around in all these departments, and I'm trying to get us to look at it in a different way. Commissioner Scholl and then Commissioner Savas.
Yes, I would like to clarify my comment regarding the requirement, the idea of requiring STRs to be owner-occupied. That means owner-occupied at least 270 days of the year with no restrictions on the number of days that the STR at that property could be rent out. The other thing, too, is that the FTE, we looked at this on how to make this work to be able to administer this difficult STR administration, and we found we couldn't do it without adding an FTE. And I think that's a fiscally austere approach. The other thing is that when it comes to property rights, yes, people who want to have a STR should have the right to use their property to increase their income. But at the same time, the people next door who don't have a STR and want a quiet neighborhood, we are also concerned about their property rights. We heard stories about people who bought a home in a quiet neighborhood to retire and found that on the left and on the right, those homes became STRs. And without the benefit of the regulation that we've worked on and we're talking about here today, people have reported that on a weekend, in the house on the right, there's 80 people for a party. A house on the left, there's 100 people for a wedding. And there are more cars in the neighborhood than you can count. That's why we need this regulation today. We need it to be able to support the best interest of all of our people, both STR, pro-STR people and anti-STR. This regulation is a compromise, but it is in the best interest of the public. And I urge my fellow commissioners today to vote yes on this, to move this into a public hearing. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, so I appreciate, again, Commissioner Shull and I might have a different approach and opinion, but that's maybe a discussion for 3 years from now when this pilot's completed, and we'll see where the board is then. I do want to say I do echo the concerns about property rights, and I think, like I said before, I think the neighboring properties to an SCR also have a property right for the peaceful enjoyment of their property. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to recognize everyone's property rights. So I think this is very responsive. And Chair, I think you'll be delighted, and I'll just read the language of the motion or the option here.
Before we go to a motion, Commissioner Savas, there's further discussion
Sure.
we need to have.
Yeah, but I do want to, I think it's important to say that the option one specifically does exactly what you ask, and that is formally seek one-time startup funding for the Tourism Development Council and subsequently direct staff to begin the public outreach process. So that's exactly what you asked for. That's exactly what will happen.
Okay, and Commissioner West needs to speak. So how is this going to, so we heard from people up on the mountain that this is a problem, and I don't disagree with, a house having 80 people for a wedding when there's no parking. That is a problem. So how are we going to monitor that with this program? And how are we going to enforce the bad behaviors? That's not answered.
It's been explained, it has been answered.
I don't, who's going to go up and say on a Saturday afternoon where there's a wedding, oh, you can't be here? Because that's what we heard from the people who came forward. You need to do something, you need to do something. So what we've done is we've created more government regulation, we've created an FTE, and we've created all of this, but how do we address the core problem that we're trying to solve here? And this just isn't for the mountain, by the way, it's countywide, totally countywide. So how do we do that? Go ahead.
The regulation and the discipline of STRs is a matter of the owner or the manager of the STR. They're responsible for maintaining the property when it's rented out in accordance with this regulation. So, for example, when you receive your permit from the county, you certify that you will do these things in terms of limiting the number of guests, which is based on the number of
Bedrooms and
bedrooms.
stuff.
You will ensure that there's no more cars than are authorized in your permit. You will ensure that the trash is dealt with appropriately, and that you will ensure that the requirements about noise is also a matter of discipline in the way you run out your STR. So the idea is to do this very efficiently, using the responsibility of the owner or the manager of the STR, and not to rely on phone calls to the sheriff and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it's all in the permit application.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Chair.
Yeah, then Commissioner West needs to talk.
Yeah, and I just want to just add that again, answer to your question, which we've shared before, and that is with this affidavit process, which Commissioner Scholl was referencing, this process is basically 3 strikes, and these bad actors are out, right? So they're going to know, they're going to be notified right away. So I think by the elimination of the bad actors and all the requirements that they're going to, again, certify, sign an affidavit to, they're going to abide by, we're going to weed those folks out, and they're not going to be able to do business in Clackamas County without violating the law. So that's how we're doing this. Again, 3-year pilot project, not funded with general fund. We'll get there.
I don't know how we're going to evict people from their own home ownership just because based on.
Oh, no, we're not
behavior.
evicting anyone. No
Well,
one's
you say,
evicted.
you say 3 strikes and they're out. Well,
Three strikes, and they're no longer registered to be an STR operator.
that's true, but they could still go ahead and do it.
Sure, they can. They'll violate county ordinance.
You can
Yes.
speed on the way home, too, if you want to.
Commissioner West, please.
I am glad that we have less restrictive language with regards. I'm just not there with you, Commissioner Scholl. I respect the work you've done on this. I understand why you want to go down that path, but as a government, we have to figure out how to allow people to take that personal responsibility for the activities in which they engage in within a society, and how to not be too heavy-handed as a government. And I can feel the tension you guys are wrestled with on this, and you guys really have. And previous boards, as Chair Smith has given me a historical lesson on, this is not a new issue for this commission. I'm curious, how was this affidavit developed, and why, it looks very purposeful, and why you guys came up with these different, regulate things to agree to abide by, a good honor, good neighbor contract, and almost they're setting with themselves, the county, and their neighbors. Can you guys explain to me a little bit how that was developed and the input that went into this affidavit specifically?
Yeah, sure. So much credit to our staff, Caroline and Everett and Nate Boderman and others, department heads, all had a hand in this, and some oversight to develop this program. So that's essentially where it originated from.
Mm-hmm. Also, I might add that this affidavit and the regulation comes from listening to many, many, many people in the county, both pro and con, on the control of STRs, and also studying the successes and failures of other counties and states, because the STR issue has become a big issue just about in every city. So we learned from those cities and took away the good things, and that's what is in the affidavit.
Okay. And did you guys look at other did other communities use an affidavit model like this, or is this innovative to Clackamas County?
I would defer to staff.
Can you tell me a little bit about specifically what informed it?
Yeah, so as Commissioner Scholl pointed out, I don't know if I introduced myself, Everett Wild, Policy Advisor for the board. As Commissioner Scholl pointed out, we looked at some best practices from other jurisdictions, mostly counties, but a few cities as well throughout the state of Oregon. So we tried to find a fine line balance between achieving the goals that Commissioner Scholl and Commissioner Savas and the board had talked about, while not making a process that was too onerous, burdensome on either the county, which would mean it would cost more money to operate, or on the short-term rental operators and visitors. So we looked at Hood River County, Tillamook County, Clatsop County, Deschutes County, and took their ideas. I would say, to the affidavit model specifically, I do not recall seeing another county that used that specific model in the way that we have, but requiring a permit to operate and having to affirm certain facts about your property before receiving the permit was used in other counties.
Why are we not charging for the permit? Can you explain why that we wouldn't do that as an additional revenue source? Because there's some initial costs to get this off the ground. It sounds like, I'm just curious.
Sure.
Would you like- I can
Commissioner
answer
Scholl wants to
that.
respond.
Certainly. The previous board, 5-6 years ago, when they came up with a regulation, they had I think it was $800 permit fee every 2 years. The problem with that is, as we looked at that, we realized it was inequitable, because some people have STR that they rent out, a couple weeks of the year. Other people have STRs that they rent out 52 weeks of the year. So charging them both a fixed permit fee was inequitable. So we looked at how we could use a small percentage of the transient lodging tax and use that to fund the program. And that way, it comes out to be much more equitable.
Okay. Am I correct in understanding that it is the traveler, the resident of the STR, that pays this fee, not the business owner, the homeowner, or other community members? We're actually charging an additional small fee on people that are traveling.
But ultimately, they're the ones that are paying. How it's collected can be unique based on Airbnb or contracts and agreements thereof. So ultimately, yes, the person occupying is ultimately paying it. But if the room is not being occupied, there's nothing to pay.
There's nothing to
So
pay.
the owner
Okay.
of the property is not paying anything unless they rent it, right?
Okay. So, and then, sorry, I have another comment. I guess the way that I have just a unique perspective, and I know that Chair Smith even has run an Airbnb before, so in some capacity, she gets this business model. My parents are trying to fund their retirement. They built a little cottage in the back of their house in Portland. It's beautiful, by the way. If you ever need to stay in Portland, I recommend it. But my dad, like I've said, is one of the good operators, and prides himself on being that kind of operator. I feel like this. My dad wouldn't push back against this. And I don't see any. He would probably welcome it as a good guy in the business, because he would never allow the 80 cars at a wedding, and you wouldn't either, Chair, at your bed and breakfast.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I had to build a parking lot, and I had secure agreements with the Malala High School football field parking lot that when I had weddings, because I was certified for 250 people at a wedding, I had to go out and find my own parking, and I did it. So, but in this case, they can't do that, but go ahead.
Yeah, but that just shows you were a good operator. My dad's a good operator, and I'm really proud of how he does it. It's pretty cool to see how it's helped my parents, and as they go into the closer retirement years. And I think that's a lot of these people. And hopefully, what you do is you create a culture that basically helps mitigate bad behavior. The same way, you don't even have to tell people usually to pick up the dog poop at the park, because culturally, somebody will call them out for not picking up their dog's mess at the park, right? And government's not bringing this heavy-handed regulation down to say, if you don't pick up that dog, that's an automatic $250,000 fine, or that's $250, not $250,000. That would be really bad for dog poop. But my point is you're allowing we all have a good neighbor agreement, And in this community, we expect you to be a good neighbor. And there's almost like internal accountability potentially with this that I find interesting. In the same way that at the dog park, 90% of the time people just take care of their own mess. And this would create a culture maybe where those few bad actors that are, causing a lot of angst in this community would be they would allow their neighbors to help them change the behavior of bad acting neighbors. I hope that that's what this happens. If it is, I trust that it's self-sufficient. There's still questions to be asked. It sounds like we're maybe confident. We'll give it a maybe confident that the tourism department will agree to partner with us on this. I think if it works, it really benefits them in the long run with sustainable funding. I'm interested to see how it progresses. I think there's, you guys have worked hard to strike a balance here. So that answers my questions, and that's kind of my viewpoint towards it. I don't know if there's more discussion, but that's kind of where I'm at, Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Savas, I think you were up next.
Yeah, this might be, it's not the best analogy, but getting Commissioner West to one of your earlier questions, if you bought a building and you purchased the building, your hopes was to open a liquor store. You have to apply to be with the OLCC, and you have to operate within parameters. Now, it's very heavy-handed, there's fees, it's very onerous to do that. This is far less onerous, and if they violate it, they're out of business. They still own their building.
Yeah.
They still have a property right to do something with the building, but they still can't sell liquor out of there unless they play by the rules. This is, not the best analogy, but essentially, there's a model, if you will, that the basic framework of what we're doing here
Thank you.
allows.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, in response to Commissioner West's question, we have many STR operators who are, like your dad, very, very, very responsible, and they are never a problem. The reason that we have regulations in the county is because not everyone is concerned about their neighbor. And so that's why we need to have regulations. There's been a great deal of public pressure against STR operators who are not concerned or not respectful about their neighbors. And that hasn't helped. That's why we need this regulation. Thanks.
Commissioner West, and then I'm going to make a comment.
I have a quick question. 3 strikes, you're out, and then you happen to own a property in the mountain, and you just have a property on the mountain forever, and you either have to sell it or you're stuck with a property that you can't use as income any further. Is this board open to a discussion, or maybe I'm just going to throw an idea out there that 3 strikes, you're out, and you have 12 months before you can reapply for something, or is it a forever ban?
Everett.
Yes, that's actually in there. If you look on page 5, under the penalties, large bullet, the second sub-bullet explains how that process would work. So if you violate the registration, or you don't pay your TLT, or some other violation of the program code, you'd be sent warning letters. And then after that, if you fail to comply, you would be suspended for up to a year. And then if you advertise or have paying guests on the property while you're suspended, you could get fined for that.
Okay, so it's progressive. It's not okay, thank you.
So, Gary, what staff is going to carry out this program?
It will, still undetermined, but likely our finance department the staff member will be housed in that department.
For the development of this program, though, who does that? Council?
We'd work with county council primarily to help develop the ordinance, and county administration, and public and government affairs, and then it's just finding the office to actually administer the program.
Okay. Commissioners, we will not hold, regardless of the vote today, we will not be scheduled for a hearing until we get a certificate from the tourism department that the funding is secure. Now, you can make whatever motion you want, but a hearing will not be scheduled until we get that finalized, because we don't do hearings. Hearings are not the place for policy making or decisions. Just letting you know that. That's all I have to say today.
I think that's pretty well in the intent of the motion. So, Chair, I move that we go forward with option 1 to formally seek one-time startup funding from the Tourism Development Council in the form of a letter, and subsequently direct staff to begin a public outreach process, draft an ordinance language, and schedule public hearings.
Seconded.
I like a modification on the motion. I would like to strike out schedule public hearings. No hearings will be scheduled. Let me repeat, as the chair, until we get a certified letter, or whomever signs it over there, that the tourism department is willing to pay whatever the ask is for 3 years. It's the way it is. Okay? Can you do that,
Well,
commissioners?
Chair, just to take the reference back to, I don't want to, this is delicate, I don't want to overpromise but if you look back at the last table, okay, that funding model is relying upon a simple one-time, not 3-year, a one-time $120,000 contribution from the TDC, not a 3-year one. This
Okay.
model works.
I stand corrected.
Okay.
Would you still like to alter your motion to satisfy the chair who schedules the meetings?
To modify the motion to what?
Modify the motion, just take out the last 4 words, and schedule public hearings until we get that letter and we come back during issues or another policy session.
Okay, so I will reword it. I'll reword the motion because I made the motion. I'll reword the motion. I think that gets to your point. So I think this will address it. So let me find it here again.
Commissioner Scholl, you're in the queue. Do you want to?
Well, I was just going to suggest that we go with what Commissioner Savas read, and and schedule public hearings, change the word "and" to followed by scheduled public hearings.
That's basically how I was restructured with different words. So I,
Commissioners, I've gone a long way in accommodating you.
We're trying to
Take out the last 4 words of your motion.
Chair-
Because I don't think I just don't think you realize.
I think I do. I do. So I respectfully, I'll reword the motion slightly that gets to your point, and then we can vote it up or down.
Okay.
I moved for option 1, slightly modified, and I'll read it. Formally seek one-time startup funding from the Tourism Development Council, and then, once a letter is received, assuring the funding, direct staff to then begin a public outreach process, draft ordinance language, and then schedule public hearings.
Seconded.
Motion has been submitted by Commissioner Savas. Gary and Shannon, do you understand the motion?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, been seconded by Commissioner Shaw. You're not there yet. I'm a no on this. Just saying, commissioners, please call the poll.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 3-1. Thank you very much.
You said aye, Chair. Did you mean no?
I mean, no,
Okay.
excuse me, 3-1.
All right. Very good. That's the last policy session for the morning. We come back at 1:15 for.
And we have a luncheon today.
There's an employee
Commissioners,
recognition
I hope
lunch.
you're all attending. And we come back at 1:30,
1:15.
1:15. Thank you very much.
14, Commissioner West.
Seeing no further business at the moment, we are in recess. Thank you very much.